the apostle to the Gentiles. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most fascinating characters in the Bible, Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. He is one of the most influential figures in Christian history. Although he did not live the most important story, Jesus' story, it was Paul who carried that story to places no one ever imagined it could reach. Let's delve into his life, origins, and mission. The early years of Saul. Paul was born as Saul in Tarsus, an important city in what is now Turkey. He came from a Jewish family belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. The name Saul was a tribute to King Saul, a famous ancestor with a complicated history. From the start, it seemed that Saul was destined to do something different, perhaps even to correct past mistakes. Tarsus was a prosperous city, brimming with culture, commerce, and knowledge. There, Saul grew up in a vibrant environment. His family held a privileged status, as they had Roman citizenship, a significant advantage at the time. This granted Saul special rights and a position few Jews possessed. Despite this, his family firmly maintained their Jewish traditions. Saul's father was a Pharisee and a tent-maker, and from a young age, he taught his son the trade. Saul's childhood was a blend of labor and faith. At the age of 14, his life took an important turn. He was sent to Jerusalem to study under one of the greatest teachers of the time, Rabbi Gamaliel. Education under Gamaliel. Gamaliel was a highly respected figure in Judaism, known for teaching how to apply the law practically in everyday life. Like Saul's father, Gamaliel was a Pharisee and helped shape the brilliant mind of the young Saul. Under his guidance, Saul learned to interpret Jewish law and understand its relationship to the social and religious issues of his time. Saul spent about 8 years studying with Gamaliel. During this period, he stood out as a dedicated and passionate student. He was determined to become an influential Pharisee, and all signs indicated he was on the right path. The role of the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. The Pharisees were an important group within Judaism. Their goal was to interpret the law of Moses in a way that made sense in the modern world of the time. Saul was part of this movement and eventually became a notable figure among them. He was even chosen to join the Sanhedrin, the most powerful council in Judaism. This was a significant honor, as the Sanhedrin made decisions that impacted the entire Jewish community. Returning to Jerusalem. After studying with Gamaliel, Saul returned to his hometown, Tarsus, where he served in the local synagogue. However, a few years later, he was called back to Jerusalem to take on an even greater role in the Sanhedrin. Armed with knowledge and zeal, Saul returned to the city where his journey had truly begun. But upon his return, Saul encountered a different Jerusalem. Something new was happening. The message of Jesus, the man who had been crucified years earlier, was beginning to spread. And Saul, with his deep dedication to Jewish law, was not willing to accept this. He believed it was his duty to protect his faith and fight against this new sect that followed Jesus. The beginning of a great transformation. This story of Saul, who would later be called Paul, is only just beginning. He is remembered as someone who underwent a radical transformation. But before that, he was a man filled with zeal for his faith and committed to what he believed was right. His passion and determination would eventually lead him to become one of the most significant figures in the history of Christianity. The revelation of Peter and the inclusion of the Gentiles. Over the course of 3 years, the Apostle Peter experienced a profoundly significant revelation that changed the course of Christian history. In a dream, Peter saw something extraordinary, a sheet being lowered from heaven, filled with both clean and unclean animals. He heard the voice of God telling him to eat. Initially confused and reluctant, Peter received a clear message that, just as he was no longer to distinguish between clean and unclean animals, he should also stop making distinctions between Jews and Gentiles. This vision was a powerful symbol. The Gentiles were now included in salvation through Jesus Christ. This revelation was part of God's divine plan to unite people from all nations into one family, demonstrating that diversity is a central aspect of God's kingdom. Initially, the Christian movement was composed of Jews who recognized Jesus as the Messiah, including Samaritans who became part of this faith community. But with the inclusion of the Gentiles, the reach of the gospel became truly universal. It was in Antioch that this unity began to take shape. The church in Antioch was established after the persecution of Stephen and quickly became a central hub for Christ's followers among the Gentiles. Barnabas, a man of great faith, was sent to teach this new Gentile church. It was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians, a name meaning little Christs. Recognizing the significance of this movement, Barnabas traveled to Tarsus to find Saul, also known as Paul, and brought him back to help lead this growing community. Paul and Barnabas's first missionary journey. The time came when God called Paul and Barnabas to a greater mission, to bring the good news of the gospel to the Gentile nations. Driven by this divine calling, they embarked on a journey that would change the course of church history. Their goal was clear: to share the message of forgiveness and salvation, with the hope that God's kingdom would expand to the ends of the earth, perhaps even as far as Spain. Before setting out, they enlisted John Mark to assist in their mission. The first leg of their journey took them from Seleucia, the port of Antioch, to the island of Cyprus. It was in Cyprus that a significant event occurred. The Roman proconsul Sergius Paulus converted to Christianity. Inspired by this conversion, Saul adopted the name Paul, a name more familiar and accessible to the Hellenistic cultures he sought to reach. The journey, however, was not without challenges. Upon arriving in Perga, in Pamphylia, they faced strong opposition, leading John Mark to abandon the mission and return to Jerusalem. Despite this setback, Paul and Barnabas pressed on. In Pisidian Antioch, Paul preached in the synagogue but faced rejection from Jewish leaders. It was at this moment that Paul made a pivotal decision: to focus exclusively on preaching to the Gentiles. This first journey was more than just a physical expedition. It was a moment of spiritual and theological transformation. Paul, once known as a persecutor of Christians, was now recognized as the apostle to the Gentiles. He solidified the idea that Christianity was not merely a Jewish sect, but a universal movement embracing all nations. A universal message of Christ. The universal message of Christ, revealed to Peter and expanded by Paul and Barnabas, paved the way for Christianity to become a global faith. The inclusion of Gentiles in salvation illustrates that God's love transcends cultural, ethnic, and social barriers. The roles of Peter, Barnabas, and Paul were essential in this expansion. Peter received the initial revelation. Barnabas was the mentor and leader who laid the groundwork, and Paul became the passionate spokesperson for the faith among the Gentiles. Their stories remind us that God calls ordinary people to fulfill extraordinary plans. The message remains: Christianity is for everyone, and salvation is available through faith in Jesus Christ. May this story inspire us to live and share this message with the world, just as they did. Conflicts and persecutions during Paul's journeys. Paul and Barnabas's missionary journey was not just marked by victories, but also by intense conflicts and persecutions. In Iconium, one of the first cities they visited, they faced significant opposition. Initially, their work showed promise with many conversions, but resistance soon arose. Tensions escalated to the point where a mob prepared to stone them. Faced with imminent danger, Paul and Barnabas were forced to flee for their lives. Arriving in Lystra, a nearby city, Paul and Barnabas continued their mission to preach the gospel. They performed a miracle that garnered widespread attention. In the name of Jesus, Paul healed a man who had been lame since birth. Witnessing this, the local Gentiles were astonished and, in a dramatic misunderstanding, mistook Barnabas for Zeus and Paul for Hermes, believing them to be Greek gods in human form. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Despite Paul and Barnabas's efforts to correct the mistake and emphasize that they were merely servants of God, local Jewish leaders incited the crowd against them. Paul was stoned and left outside the city for dead. Miraculously, he survived. Though injured, his resilience drove him to press on. They traveled to Derbe, where they rested and continued preaching the gospel. On their return journey, Paul and Barnabas revisited the churches they had founded, strengthening the believers and encouraging them to remain steadfast in the face of trials. Despite the adversities, they concluded this journey in Italia, reflecting on the challenges they had faced and how God had sustained them throughout their mission. The Council of Jerusalem. After returning to Antioch, Paul and Barnabas encountered a new kind of challenge, a theological debate that threatened to divide the fledgling Christian church. Some men from Judea were teaching that Gentiles needed to be circumcised and follow the law of Moses to be saved. This teaching sparked a major conflict, pitting faith in Jesus against Jewish traditions. Recognizing the gravity of the issue, Paul and Barnabas decided to take the matter to the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. This gathering, known as the Council of Jerusalem, took place between 48 and 50 AD. James, the brother of Jesus, presided over the meeting, accompanied by Peter, John, and other key leaders. The discussions were intense. Peter spoke authoritatively about his own experience with Gentiles, reminding everyone how God had poured out the Holy Spirit on them without requiring adherence to the law. Paul and Barnabas also shared the miracles and conversions they had witnessed during their missionary travels. In the end, the council reached a historic decision. They agreed that Gentiles did not need to follow Jewish customs, such as circumcision, to become Christians. Instead, they affirmed that salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ alone. They concluded that the cross of Christ had fulfilled the law of Moses, freeing both Jews and Gentiles from the obligation to observe it. From then on, obedience to God became an expression of gratitude and reverence, not a legalistic requirement. A defining moment in Christian history. These events are pivotal in the history of Christianity. The persecutions Paul endured shaped his character and strengthened his resolve to spread the gospel to all nations. He demonstrated that Christ's message could not be silenced by opposition or suffering. The Council of Jerusalem, on the other hand, ensured that Christianity would be an inclusive and universal faith, open to people of all cultures and backgrounds. This decision stood as a powerful testimony to God's grace, which welcomes all who believe, regardless of their traditions or heritage. Ultimately, these events remind us of the centrality of grace and faith in Christianity. The message of Jesus Christ is clear. Salvation is a gift from God, not something we can earn through our own efforts. May these stories inspire each of us to live by faith, trusting in God's grace and love to transform our lives and the world around us. Did you like this content? If this video helped you, share it with someone who also needs to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more videos like this one. And don't forget to leave your likes and comments below. May God bless you and your family. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.